Hi and welcome, my name is Brandi Joan and today I'm going to be guiding you through how to sew my first pattern with McCall's, number M8360. Woo! Before you sit down to sew your pattern, make sure that you check the pattern packet for the size ranges and all of the notions that you'll need for this project, which for this pattern includes lining, your main fabric, one 16-inch invisible zipper, thread of your choice, elastic thread, one 1 1/4 inch buckle, 3/8 elastic, 4 1/2-inch grommets, and lightweight fusible interfacing. Once you've gathered all of your supplies, you can open your pattern packet, which includes the instructions and the pattern that you'll use to cut out all of your pattern pieces. Once you have everything cut out, you should have your back bodice that you're going to cut on the fold, your bodice side back, cut 2 fabric and 2 lining, your bodice side front, you're going to cut 2 fabric and 2 lining, and your bodice front that you're going to cut 2 fabric and 2 lining of. The elastic guide, your front and back band, you're going to cut 2 fabric and 2 lining of each. The pants front, cut 2, pant side front, cut 2, side front pocket, cut 2, pocket facing, cut 2, pants back, cut 2, your back pocket and back pocket band, cut 2 of each, your yoke back, cut 2, and your belt piece that you're going to cut 1 fabric and 1 interfacing of. And this step isn't necessary, but I am going to pre-serge all of my edges before I start sewing my pieces together. First, we're going to take both bodice front sections, matching the notches and the dots, and sew them together along the center front seam, right sides together. Once you sew those together, press the seams flat and open. Next, grab your bodice side fronts and pin them to the bodice fronts, right sides together, and sew. Once you've sewn those in place, you're going to press the seams towards the center of the bodice and clip the curved edges. Then, top stitch the bodice along the side front seams. With their right sides together, pin the right bodice side back to the right bodice side front at the side seam, matching the notches, and sew it in place. Put that aside for later and grab your front bands. Matching the notches and dots, sew them right sides together along the center seam. Press the seam open and reinforce the lower corners on both front bands. With right sides together, pin the right side of the back band to the right front band at the right side seam, matching the notches, and sew it in place. Press the lower edge of the band under 3/8 of an inch, clipping and folding the inner corners in. When you're done, it should look something like this. Pin the wrong side of the band to the right side of the bodice so your raw edges are matched, matching the notches, centers, and side seams, and all of the dots, baste the raw edges in place. Then, edge stitch the band along the pressed edge, pivoting at the center front and inner corners. Top stitch the facing along the pressed edge, pivoting at the center front and the inner corners 1/4 of an inch from the seam. Now, grab your bodice back. To form the casing, turn the upper edge of the bodice back to the inside along the fold line indicated on your pattern. Then, give it a good press and turn the edge under 1/4 of an inch. Cut a piece of elastic using your elastic guide and insert it through the casing, having the ends even, and stitch across both ends. To reduce bulk, pull out the ends of the elastic and cut close to the stitching. Next, to shear the bodice back, thread the sewing bobbin by hand with the elastic thread. It's important not to use your machine when doing this because it will be way too tight. The shearing does require some trial and error, so I recommend using a test sample first to try out some stitch lengths and tension settings. Once you have your correct settings, it's time to shear the back. Sew the first row across the back 1 inch below the casing stitching. Continue to sew across the back until the entire back is covered, spacing each row 1/2 inch apart. Now, pin the bodice back to the right bodice side back, matching the notches and the dots. Sew that in place and set it aside. Then bring over your left side back band and press the lower edge up 3/8 of an inch. Then pin the wrong side of the band to the right side of the left bodice back. Make sure to match all of the raw edges, notches, and dots. Baste the raw edges and edge stitch the facing along the pressed edge. Then top stitch the facing 1/4 inch from the pressed edge. Pin the left bodice side back to the bodice back, matching the notches and dots, and sew it in place. Set that aside for later and bring your lining pieces over. Now, with right sides together, pin the 2 front lining sections together the same way we did with the main fabric. Sew down the center front seam and press it flat and open. Now, still the same way we did with the main fabric, we're going to bring our 2 side front lining pieces over and sew them to the 2 front sections. Right sides together, and sew. Then press the seams towards the center front and clip the curved edges if necessary. With right sides together, pin the right bodice side back lining to the right bodice side front lining at the right side seam and sew it in place. Pin the lining to the bodice front and right back over the center back, keeping the left back free. So basically, you want your sheared back section and your left back section to be tucked in between the lining and the main fabric when you sew it in place. Stitch the right side back and front upper edge, pivoting at the dots, and trim the seams. Turn that right side out and understitch the lining as far as you can go. Turn the lining to the inside, turning the bodice back outward, and press. With right sides together, pin the left bodice side back lining to the left bodice side back, matching the notches and dots. Stitch the left side back and upper edge and then trim the seams. Then understitch the lining as far as you can go. Now, bring your pants over and pin the pants front to the pants side front, right sides together, matching the notches, and sew it in place. Press the seams towards the pant front and top stitch the pants along the front seam. Pin the pocket facing to the upper side edge of the side front, matching the notches and dots. Stitch, pivoting across the seam allowance towards the lower dot. Trim the seam and edge stitch along that pocket line. Pin the side front to the pocket facing along the inner edges. Sew that in place and baste the remaining edges to the pant front. Set that aside for later and bring your pocket and pocket band over. Press under 3/8 on the lower edge of the back pocket band. Then pin the right side of the band to the wrong side of the back pocket, matching the notches and dots, and stitch the upper edge. Then trim the seam. Turn the band to the outside, press, and baste the raw edges. Top stitch the band along the pressed edge and upper edge. Then turn in the seam allowance on the sides and lower edges of the pocket, folding in the fullness at the corners, and give it a good press. Pin the pockets to the pants back, matching the dots, and edge stitch the sides and the lower edge. With the right sides together, stitch the yoke back to the upper edge of the back, matching the notches, sew it in place, and press the seam towards the yoke. Then top stitch the upper edge of the seam. With the right sides together, stitch the back pants to the front pants at the inner leg. Then stitch the front to the back at the sides, leaving the left side free about 2 inches below the notches. Once you have both of your legs sewn up, you can pin them together at the crotch and sew them in place. Now, with the right sides together, pin the pants to the bodice. Be sure to match all of the notches, the center, the dots, and the right side seams, easing the upper edge as necessary. Sew that in place and then sew it again 1/4 inch away from that seam. Open the zipper and press the tape using an iron on a very low setting so you don't melt the zipper. On the outside, pin the right side of the zipper face down on the left side back of the zipper opening. Have the coil along the seam line. the tape within the seam allowance, and the top stop about 1/8 below the upper edge. Position the zipper foot at the top of the zipper with the right groove of the foot over the coil. Stitch along the tape to the notch. Once you have one side of the zipper sewn in place, make sure that you test it to see that it still goes up all the way. Pin the remaining half of the zipper to the left side front of the zipper opening in the same manner. Make sure that the upper and lower edges of the jumpsuit are even. I like to mark mine with a little fabric marker or some chalk to help me see where I'm at. Close the zipper and check that it's invisible from the outside. That's very important. Then, pin the remaining seam allowance below the zipper and sew that shut. Turn the upper edge of the zipper tapes over the seam allowance and slip stitch it in place. Then, finish the lower edge of the jumpsuit with a double fold hem, folding 5/8 of an inch and then again another 5/8 of an inch. Now for the belt. Fold the belt in half lengthwise, right sides together, and sew it in place, leaving the end with the dot free. Trim the seam and turn everything right side out. Top stitch all the way around the belt, still leaving that one opening on the edge. Now for the buckle prong opening, slash a tiny hole on that dot that you've marked, just big enough for the buckle prong to fit through. Use a blanket stitch to cover the raw edges. For this, I'm using embroidery floss just because I have some on hand, but it's not necessary. Slip the raw end of the belt through the bar of the buckle, inserting the prong in the opening. Turn the belt back along the fold line and turn it under 5/8 of an inch. I'm sewing mine in place by hand just because I didn't have enough room to maneuver my machine around the buckle. Once the buckle is installed, apply the 4 metal eyelets to the belt at the dots, following the manufacturer's instructions. I use a snap press for mine. Put everything together and you're done.
Thank you so much for following along. If you do post your finished product on social media, please don't forget to tag me. I would love to see it. And if you enjoyed making this pattern, you might enjoy my other early spring design, this milkmaid dress, that you can find linked in the description below. And that's pretty much it, so I'll see you next time.